Hey again, guys. This is my second video. Really happy to be here again. Thanks for all the support for the first video. I really appreciate that. And the second video is, as promised, going to be about something that I'm really passionate about and that I haven't, up to this point, gotten that much of a platform to talk about. So I'm really excited to be talking about this, and it's kind of a serious subject, but I think that hopefully it will help other people me talking about it. So this video is going to be about OCD and how I struggled with OCD and my journey with that, and how I eventually sort of, I don't want to say like, I don't consider myself having recovered, but my symptoms improved a lot through therapy. And also, I want to talk about religion and how religion played into a lot of my symptoms, especially as a kid. And then how I think having a different religious paradigm really helped me as an adult. So yeah, that's what this video is going to focus on. And I may look down at my iPad occasionally, so if you see my glasses have a weird glare on them, I'm going to try to avoid that, but it may happen. First of all, I just want to talk a little bit about what OCD is, because I think a lot of people don't know what it is. You may hear somebody saying like, oh, I'm a little OCD, or like, oh, it's my OCD acting up, or something like that. And really, OCD isn't the kind of thing you can be a little bit of. It's not like a personality quirk or like a trait. It's like not to be reductive, but it's a diagnosis, and it's a thing that you identify as. So you either sort of are it or have it or don't. And of course you can identify like to a degree with the symptoms. That is possible. But ultimately, like, people are only diagnosed with OCD or identify in that way if it's like really a part of their lives, and if it significantly hinders them or significantly has hindered them in the past, or it is really a part of the way that they think, like inherently. So yeah, and I do consider myself in that category. It actually took me a really long time to be diagnosed. I was diagnosed, I guess I was maybe 24, was when I was starting grad school. So yeah, I had it my entire life, in my opinion. I had my first intrusive thought when I was 3. And so I mentioned intrusive thoughts, so I'm gonna say what those are now. I meant to do that first. So I would say OCD is characterized by, in my experience, everybody's different. So I can't say what it is for everybody, but in my experience, it's been characterized by two things that are kind of, to some degree, the same thing, but I want to speak about them separately because I think that they need to be talked about separately. So one thing is intrusive thoughts, and these can be thoughts of about a variety of themes. Usually people with OCD have themes that their thoughts tend to focus on. And as a kid, my thoughts tended to focus on harm of various sorts, either harm to myself, like fear that harm would come to myself, or fear that harm would come to people I loved. Fear that I was capable of causing harm, that I was in fact a bad person. And often, because I was a religious kid, I would also think of that as a sinful person, who was really just inherently capable of harming other people. And not just inherently capable, but that because I was capable of it, I couldn't believe that I wouldn't do it. And that brings me to the second thing, which is doubt. Doubt is a really important thing for people with OCD. People with OCD can doubt a lot of things. I doubted that people who loved me loved me. I doubted that I was saved. Again, so I grew up Christian. I grew up in a Baptist house and a largely Christian community. And yeah, I doubted that I was saved a lot, even though I had done what in our community, like, meant you were. I frequently doubted that. So yeah, so it was pretty heavy, and this was, all throughout my childhood, I had thoughts like this. So that's one thing that doubt can be. But another thing that doubt can be is doubt that, because you can't reduce the uncertainty that something bad will happen, it means it will. Like it's as if it is definitely going to happen. Like, 2% or 3% possibility turns into 99% possibility. So like, even though something may have like a very low likelihood of happening, you end up worrying about things that, you end up worrying about things that have a very low likelihood of happening and treating them as if they're probably going to happen, and worrying about them to the extent that, some people lose sleep over it. Some people have compulsions, and that's where the compulsions come in. Is the compulsions can sometimes promise to reduce your anxiety. They never really do, because the thing about compulsions is that they work for like a second, and then they don't anymore, and then you need to do them again. So but a lot of people also have what I've heard called before pure obsessive, which is more just the thoughts and less of the compulsions. I think that might describe me, because growing up, my compulsions were more mental. I would have to try to convince myself that things weren't going to happen. So yeah, it can take the form of long, and this is the form that it took for me. Instead of touching doorknobs or having to wash your hands repeatedly, or one of those more visible compulsions that people are really familiar with, and which, by the way, are not by any means the only compulsions. But yeah, rather than those, I had what you'd call mental compulsions, I guess. I had times where I would have to think myself, or try to think myself out of a hole. So like, I'm worried that this person doesn't love me. And then I would have to be like, well, of course they love you. Of course they love you. That's silly. That doesn't make any sense. And no matter how many times my brain would try to prove, or, oh, of course they love you, or they wouldn't have, done all these things for you. And then I would cite all the things that they had done that were good. But my brain would still be like, but what if they don't? But what if they don't? But what if they're just pretending? Couldn't they just be pretending? And so, yeah, that's the problem with like the OCD brain, or my brain for sure, the way that it has worked, is that like it will think you out of anything. Like, yeah, it will find a way like to unconvince you when you're trying to convince yourself. And yeah, I would say another compulsion that I had was telling people about my thoughts. So I felt like I had to tell people close to me, like authority figures and stuff, about my thoughts, which was often very disturbing for them because they didn't know what I was even talking about. So, if you tell a grown up, like, I had a thought about harming myself, or I had a thought about harming someone else. And this is just a thought. The reason they call them intrusive is because they intrude into your mind as if they're coming from elsewhere. They're not. You don't see them as coming from you. And that's the way I experienced it. It wasn't that I wanted to do something bad. It was that I was like wondering, could I do something bad? Might I do something bad? And these thoughts would just come into my head like completely randomly, just in the car with my parents, driving to go to vacation, thought, and that was the other thing that didn't make sense to people. Is like, why is this coming up at this time? Like, we're all happy. Everybody's happy. What is going on? So yeah, so the timing would be weird for adults, and the time, and also the thoughts themselves were really often disturbing. And so like people didn't understand what it was about. And also, and the other thing I wanted to talk about is how religion played into this. So I already hinted at the fact that that I wasn't sure if I was saved. I wasn't sure if I was, going to heaven or going to hell, essentially. And to elaborate on that a little bit, some of I really think some of the things, some of the aspects of Christian churches, or at least the Baptist church that I went to, really contributed to the way that I was feeling, and um, not, I'm sure by no fault of their own, and like also they really believed everything they were doing was right because they thought they were helping people go to heaven, and so like yeah, not necessarily to fault them, but also I think to shed light on ways that anyone, any organization can do better by people who have mental health problems. So one of those ways that I think that the church sort of failed me was by by really, really emphasizing belief, um, and by using a lot of tactics that I think I would even call coercive. Music, and I love the music. I'm not like necessarily knocking the music, but like music with an altar call, good old turn your eyes upon Jesus, like it'll pull your heart and it'll make you want to go down there and confess something. And especially if you have OCD, it's going to make you want to go down there and confess something. Because that's a compulsion anyway. Like I already said, like telling was one of my big compulsions. So telling Jesus my sins also got to be a big compulsion in prayer. Yeah, so I think altar calls were big. The music, the emotion. I think revivals of any kind of weekend event, like I forget what they called, Hearts on Fire. There was a big conference called Hearts on Fire, and in a lot of ways, I loved Hearts on Fire. I remember really enjoying it. It was some of the best time with friends that I got to spend. Um, it was a weekend for teens to just be like teens. But also like it was really intense, and a lot of those revival situations, summer camps were the same way. Basically any situation where you didn't really have an easy out and you were just sitting there being like appealed to, those were really big for me and would always have me down at the altar. So like I ended up getting saved, because I mean, the way that my denomination believed, you really couldn't get saved more than once. So that's why I use the quotes. If I had done that already, what was I doing? I was just repeating an empty form that I thought would help me if I did it again and again. And yeah, so I would get saved, or rededicate my life. I had done that. I did that maybe 3 times. Maybe I actually got saved like at least I think 3 times, and I rededicated at least once. And that was, in the space of just a few years, maybe from like 7 to, I don't know, 14 or something like that. And so, yeah, that was so all in the space of just a few years. And yeah, let's see, what would I say about that? Yeah, I did that a lot. And I remember one time a friend was, he attended church well, he didn't normally attend church with me. He attended a different church, but he went to church with me one day because I invited him, and it was a special event. It was a revival, yeah, I believe it was a revival of some sort. And I remember going down, and I think I was maybe 14, and we were the same age, but I remember him being surprised, and he was like, haven't you done this before? Have you ever gotten saved before? And he made it sound really tactful because he's a really tactful person, but I was like, I was aware enough to realize that that wasn't something that everyone did. That part of the reason he was asking was because not everyone would go down and get saved 3 times and then rededicate their life multiple times. And that was something that maybe I didn't need to be doing. It was the first time that it ever occurred to me. And so, yeah, I do think there were ways that it played in. And I also think just the paradigm of, God will help you. You don't need anything like, and I was never told this overtly because I didn't know that I had mental health problems. And I didn't know that I had, a mental illness. So I was never told this overtly, but in many ways I was told it in I guess subliminally. Somehow I got the message that God was the one who was supposed to make you feel good and feel peace. And if you were not feeling those things, it was probably your fault. You probably hadn't done it right. Because, God being all powerful and good, would be able to do it right. So if you had done your part, he would have done his part, and bada bing, bada boom, you'd be feeling better. So yeah, I think not talking about mental health issues more, not overtly saying that things like depression, things like OCD, that these things happen and that they're not always things you can think your way out of. In fact, they're rarely things you can think your way out of, or they wouldn't be those things at all. Not talking about that is something that the Christian church, and particularly that church that I went to, I can't speak for every church, but I think they could do better in that way. I also think this is a broader conversation, much broader conversation, but I also think they could do better just in representing women's testimonies more, and talking about what it means to be a woman who's trying to be religious, and just different people's testimonies, just a variety of people standing up and speaking. And this is I'm certainly not the first person to have said this. There's a whole conversation going on about this. And I don't even know enough about it to necessarily tell you who should, who the people are who are talking about it. I just know that it is happening. But yeah, I think my life intersects with that larger conversation and story. And from my perspective, it definitely just not having more discussion of all the different things that you could be, thinking about and going through, including mental illness. And that, I think that was a sort of shortfall. And another thing, so that's that part. And I also wanted to say, I think I might have left this out, but I think another thing that I very much got to feel was that my thoughts themselves were shameful. And I think I was told this a bit, again, kind of subliminally, but definitely told this, by authority figures who, would, if I told them my thoughts, they would say things like, how could you think that? How could you think that you would do something like that, or that someone else would do something like that? How could you even think that? What have we ever done to make you think that? So I got this very kind of shamey message, and again, I don't think that was necessarily at all something that anybody was trying to give me, but I did get it, and I did get it. And that was hard. It was hard to feel like I was constantly doing something wrong, and like my thoughts themselves were wrong, even though I didn't even consider them my thoughts. They were thoughts that were coming to me from outside. So yeah, it was hard to find a paradigm to understand that. At times I understood it by thinking about it in a religious framework. So I would think maybe the devil is coming in and telling me things, and maybe but again, that would suggest sin, some failing on my part that I needed to repent of. That was my framework. So even if it was the devil, somehow in my understanding, humans do have agency. And somehow it must have been my fault too. So yeah, even when I thought it could be the devil, I was still thinking, how can I repent of this, and how can I make this stop through a religious framework? And repenting was my idea to make it stop. But yeah, needless to say, that led to a cycle of me feeling bad about myself, shame. Again, going down to the altar and asking for forgiveness for things that I didn't even do, and that were so far from being my fault. They were things that were part of my brain and a mental illness that I couldn't control. So yeah, it's heavy. It's a bit heavy. But the good news is that I was diagnosed, and I did figure out how to get help. So My therapist at the graduate center, my very first, not my very first, but my very first therapist who diagnosed me, um, I never got any therapy as a kid. Like I said, nobody really thought of me as having mental health problems. I didn't think of myself that way. But yeah, I got diagnosed in grad school, and she was like, my therapist was at first confused about what was going on with me because I was saying a lot of things that didn't really make sense. And the more we talked about it, she was like, "Oh, you have OCD, and these are intrusive thoughts. That's what you're experiencing." And I was like, "So people have thoughts that aren't their own, and that they can't control, and this doesn't mean I'm a bad person." And she's like, "No, you're not a bad person." And that was like a complete life-changing moment for me. It was like a giant weight had been lifted off my chest. Because the other thing that you start to think, I can't speak for everyone again with mental illness, but I imagine that this is more widespread than just me. The other thing that you start to think after a while is like, gosh, I must be really messed up. Like, gosh, I must be really freaking crazy. And that weight was just like lifted off my chest. It was like, there's no real such thing as crazy. You're not. And you're not it. You're not irreparably messed up, and no one is. And that, I think that also interconnected with my, I'm interrupting myself. I got cognitive behavioral therapy, which is what a lot of people with OCD go through. And they do exposures where that you think about your fears, or the things the intrusive thoughts that you're repeatedly having, and you expose yourself to them until they're not scary anymore, basically, with a therapist. And so, yeah, so that was really, really helpful. And also I learned a lot of thought patterns that were like to counter negative thought patterns. I learned how to make rational responses for my anxious thoughts because I also had generalized anxiety. So yeah, so a lot of these things really helped. Also exercise, meditation, and religion. And I'm going to talk about that a little bit more. So I became a witch and a pagan maybe 2 years ago now, but it's been a long time coming. It's been through a long religious search. I've always been spiritual, and I've always wanted to find something spiritual that I could agree with, and that felt like it matched my experience, like my life experience. Yeah, so going to therapy and doing all this it made me realize over time, over a long period of time, I'm only now able to say even what I realized, but it made me realize over a long period of time that religion had fed me this idea that I was fundamentally fucked up, and that not only were my thoughts not sinful, that I wasn't sinful. I wasn't inherently sinful. There's nothing inherently wrong with me. And that, I mean, while we all make mistakes, that framework wasn't the one I wanted to stick with. And the framework of hell, I had long disagreed with. And over time, I embraced a more open philosophy that doesn't believe in hell. Wiccans and pagans, as far as I know, I've never met any of them who believe in any kind of that. I think that's because we fundamentally don't believe that anybody is wrong and anybody is necessarily right. We don't know what happens after death either. And a lot of us are more honest about admitting that, or just not willing to force that idea on anyone else. That if we have ideas about it, we're definitely not going to tell anybody that they're absolutely 100% like have to be right. So that's one big way that I think. And so I think that helped me as a person with OCD because it helped me destabilize this idea of like things that are just bad, things that are just fundamentally bad. I'm not fundamentally bad, not just because my thoughts aren't sinful, but because like that doesn't even exist. Like fundamental badness doesn't even exist. And it's like, the boogeyman. It's like, it doesn't exist. That really becoming a Wiccan and a pagan really reframed my idea about the nature of like good and evil. And it matched the reframing I was already doing. It helped me repair years of shaming myself, along with the therapy. And over time, I came to believe that I have divinity in me and that I can connect with divinity, and that there's no obstacle to that. Sin is not because sin doesn't really exist in a Wiccan concept. There's no obstacle between me and the divine. And a lot of the things that are thought of as sinful are actually thought of as beautiful in Wicca and paganism. So like sex, the body, even death, is not thought of as necessarily a bad thing. It's just thought of as another part of life. Also, I think that the paradigm of God being the only one able to fix things, I think it kept me from seeing that I had the agency to get help and that I had the agency to change my life in positive ways. And I think that now I use religion and religious and spiritual techniques to get peace. And that really helps me. And I think that other people could use any religion that they have in this way. I'm not by any means saying that it's only Wiccans and pagans, but for me, Wiccan and pagan principles definitely have helped me. And so I meditate, I pray to goddesses like the Morrigan and Persephone, and it's not always supplication, like asking them for something. Sometimes it's just listening. Sometimes it's just asking, particularly the Morrigan, I think really helps me, especially when I'm having anxiety or intrusive thoughts. The Morrigan can really help because I ask her, she's a goddess of strategy, and I ask her to help me know what to focus on. Like, if everything is like swirling around you, just what can I focus on? And sometimes that's something concrete, like, just something like, I don't know, doing a yoga pose or brushing your teeth or just something normal. But sometimes it's like, this project or that project needs to be focused on. It reminds me that like I need to pay attention to myself and I need to pay attention to my intuition about what I should be doing. And tarot, I think, obviously helps me in the same way. And this, I think it's good to say here too, that because I have OCD, like visualizing things is often kind of hard. So I'm not the best. I do have some things that I do, like I imagine sometimes if I'm feeling like anxious, I'll imagine like a cone of light coming down from my head all the way to the ground, and that's like a frequent pagan, I guess, grounding and shielding is what they call it, technique. And so I can imagine light coming down from my head. Sometimes I even have trouble with that. But yeah, that does happen sometimes where I feel as though it's like, am I really sensing the presence of a god or a goddess? Am I really, again, it's that like pathological doubt coming in. Am I really seeing, is this cone really coming down from my head? And of course the answer is like, no, in reality, it's not. Like, it's not a physical reality, no. But like, are you imagining it? Yes, you are. And so yeah, I'm still on a journey with that. I'm still very much on a journey with like trying to visualize. But I think, yes, where I was going with that was that trying to do it has helped me. And also tarot has helped me. Because it's not just visualizing, it's visualizing, but also anything that uses your intuition. So that like prayer or tarot even can be hard for me because it's like, am I doing this right? Is the meaning that I just interpreted, is it right? And this is again where like responsibility comes in as a witch. Like, we believe that we have responsibility for our own lives and our own choices. And if it's, I mean, you got to do the best you can. Like, there's no right and wrong. If you interpret a message, how you interpret it is right. And obviously if you're reading for someone else, you should also ask them what they think about it. But yeah, that's also been something that witchcraft has really helped me do. It was initially very difficult. But it's actually through practicing it, it has really, I think, helped some of the tendencies that my OCD causes. And finally, there's one more thing. The difference between belief and practice. So yeah, I alluded to this earlier too. I think Christianity and a lot of, I can't really speak for other religions really, but Christianity for sure, it's a lot about belief. It's about, what do you believe? Do you believe what we believe? And if you believe what we believe, you're one of us. And if you don't, you're not. And I know all Christians are not like that. There are, I'm sure, liberal Christians and entire liberal Christian denominations. But I certainly was not part of one of those growing up. And the message I consistently got was, if you do not believe like us, and if you are not like us in every way that we think you need to be like us, then you're not one of us at all. And like an example of this is the fact that I don't believe in hell. Automatically disqualifies me from for a lot of Christians that I know, that automatically disqualifies me from being a Christian. If I say to someone I know, like, I actually really admire Jesus and I think he was an amazing teacher and his teachings are incredibly moral and incredibly powerful. And like, I consider him to be like equal to all the figures that I worship. Like if I were to say that, and I don't, to be clear, I don't consider myself worshiping Jesus or the Christian God anymore, but I understand why people would, and I revere that practice. But yeah, if you say I don't believe in hell, that in itself disqualifies you in their minds. So yeah, so belief, that's what I mean about the prominence of belief, and also the fact that certain dogmatic things become really, really important to a lot of conservative Christians. So like, if you're gay or bi or any letter of the LGBTQIA plus acronym, like they don't, a lot of conservative Christians are not cool with that. And I've experienced that myself too. So yeah, again, belief comes to be weaponized for them. And I think that one of my favorite things about Wicca and paganism is that practice is the important thing. And I think that this could be true in any number of religions, but it's certainly true in Wicca and paganism, that like, it's not important at all what you believe. Like, you don't have to believe that you're contacting the goddess or a goddess. You don't have to believe that your magic will work. Well, I mean, I guess at some point you do kind of have to believe that your magic will work, or because intention matters. But you can come to believe more that it will work through practice. Like I was talking about earlier, practicing visualizing or practicing tarot and seeing the results. Often those things will prove themselves to you, and then through the results, and then you will come to believe more and more. And that's how it's worked for me. I have faith in what I'm doing now because I've practiced it a lot, and also it's not faith in something outside of myself. It's faith in practice. It's faith that the things I'm doing will have some result that I want them to have. So I hope that has been interesting and illuminating. And if you are one of the people who are friends who I know are following my channel, you might have learned a lot about my early years that you did not know. If you're not one of my personal friends following my channel, I still hope this was enjoyable. I hope that everybody will take away from this I guess, a commitment to try to make the people in your own circles a little bit more accepting and understanding of mental illness, and particularly in religious circles. I hope that like whatever religious community you're part of, you'll take this back and be like, hey, like we need to talk more about this. We need to think more about this and how it affects people. And most of all, I just I hope if anybody actually is struggling with mental illness in any religion, I hope this helps you, and that you realize that like there, you know, you may never like recover from it, but that like, you know, a lot of people deal really well with it, and that certain like spiritual techniques can be ways of dealing with it. And I think spirituality can be really, really can be a really beautiful way of dealing with mental illness, though obviously in addition to therapy, I have to say that again, don't not go to therapy because you think anything is going to help you, because yeah, even if you believe 110% in whatever you believe, still go to therapy. I believe in therapy as much as I believe in the goddess. So yeah, that's all I have to say. Hope you enjoyed. I'll keep talking about tarot and my personal journey, but also I hope to have more practical videos. I hope to have book reviews of Wiccan and Pagan and tarot books that I'm reading. There's going to be all kinds of stuff. So yeah, hope you enjoyed. See you around.